Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I'm Hamza Rifat and these are the headlines. President Joe Biden has called for national unity as the U.S. marks the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people. In a video message, Biden acknowledged resentment and violence against Muslim Americans, calling them true followers of a peaceful religion. Biden and First Lady Jill Biden will visit all the sites of the terrorist attacks. Israeli fighter jets have launched air raids on the Gaza Strip, violating the May ceasefire with Hamas yet again. In a tweet, Israeli army said it struck targets belonging to Hamas in response to alleged rocket attack from the Strip. In occupied East Jerusalem, the occupation forces have shot dead a Palestinian doctor near one of the gates of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Meanwhile, Red Crescent said the regime troops have also injured more than 170 Palestinian protesters in Nablus city. In Myanmar, at least 20 villagers have been killed in the country's deadliest fighting between government troops and resistance forces since July. The fighting in Magway region's Min Kar village started on Thursday, 2 days after opposition's call for nationwide uprising. According to the international media, the troops used heavy artillery, which resulted in casualties. In Russia, at least 3 people have been killed after a gas explosion caused a 2-story apartment building to partially collapse in a village. Local officials said an 11-year-old girl was amongst those killed, with 6 others injured. Russia has reported almost 800 deaths from COVID-19 and nearly 19,000 more cases overnight. Pakistan has registered 82 new deaths and over 3,400 infections in the last 24 hours. Globally, the COVID-19 death toll has reached over 4.6 million, infecting over 223 million people so far. The news in detail after a short break. Stay tuned to Indus News. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Today marks the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people and injured countless more. U.S. President Joe Biden honored the memories of those killed and injured in the attacks while calling for national unity. More in this report.
Thousands of people will gather in the capital, Washington, D.C. and other major cities to remember the fallen in the terrorist attacks of September 11. In New York City, a ceremony will take place at the 9/11 Memorial, where mourners will read victims' names. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden will visit all the attack sites to lead commemorative services. In a video message, Biden paid tribute to the victims as well as those who risked or gave their lives during the subsequent rescue missions.
To the families of the 2,977 people from more than 90 nations killed on September 11th, 2001 in New York City, Arlington, Virginia, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the 1,000 more who were injured. America and the world commemorate you and your loved ones, the pieces of your soul. We honor all those who risked and gave their lives in the minutes, hours, months, and years afterwards.
Despite the various conspiracies and doubts surrounding the origin of 9/11 attacks, the biggest outcome of the incident was a severe wave of Islamophobia, especially in the Western countries. In the name of counterterrorism, the U.S. launched multiple military campaigns over the past 2 decades in some 80 countries. In the video message, Biden also acknowledged resentment and violence against Muslim Americans, calling them true followers of a peaceful religion.
Yet we also witness the darker forces of human nature. Fear and anger, resentment and violence against Muslim Americans, true and faithful followers of a peaceful religion. We saw national unity bend. We learned that unity is the one thing that must never break. Unity is what makes us who we are, America at its best. To me, That's the central lesson of September 11th. It's that at our most vulnerable, in the push and pull of all that makes us human, in the battle for the soul of America, unity is our greatest strength.
A recent survey suggests that the world is not safer than 20 years ago, regardless of the US efforts to fight terrorism. Many participants of the poll were of the view that a large number of the current terrorist organizations and extremist ideologies are evident of the fact. The world is still very insecure, and despite the loss of hundreds and thousands of lives and trillions of dollars in the war on terror.
So for more on this, we have with us Sayyida Abida Hussain, former Pakistani ambassador to the United States. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time. My first question to you is, as former ambassador of Pakistan to the United States, how would you assess the foreign policy legacy of respective U.S. administrations in dealing with the war on terror after 9/11?
Well, 9/11 was a great shock for the entire world. And the United States vindicated itself by mounting a war against terrorism. And I think by and large, they've been very effective. The world has been a quieter place as a result thereof.
Right, right. So, ma'am, if we are to look back at the 20 years, do we currently have a more stable and secure world? Because obviously you have the proliferation of terrorist organizations all across the world. So while we might have a more stable world order as far as American security is concerned, that is not really the case globally, is it?
Yes, I think that the world is certainly more secure today than it has been in the past. And I think that terrorism has been controlled largely worldwide.
Right, right. So, ma'am, if we take a look at the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and the entire foreign policy of the Bush doctrine within Iraq as well, do you consider them to be successes or failures?
No, I think by and large these are successes. Of course, Afghanistan, you see, has never taken to foreign invasion or occupation. They drove the Soviet Red Army out of their country. And so they have not appreciated the presence of American troops. And the withdrawal of American troops has been welcomed by them.
Right, right. So if we take a look at the current Taliban government in Afghanistan, do you think within this government and with the Biden administration, relaying skepticism and suspicion as to whether this government would be able to handle terrorism in Afghanistan, do you think that we would have a far more secure region with the Taliban in power?
I think so, and I think that the Taliban are going the extra mile to put a moderate face on the government. They've made some friendly noises toward women, and they want to engage with the world. So they've and they have a moderate outlook.
They have a moderate outlook. All right, ma'am, final question. How do you see the Biden administration approaching the menace of terrorism after this 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks? What do you think the entire policy of Washington would be towards dealing with global terrorism?
I think that the Biden administration's attitude to terrorism is one of intolerance, which is as it should be. And I think that terrorism is certainly in decline.
Right. Thank you so much, Sayyida Abida Hussain, former Pakistani ambassador to the United States, for joining me on Indus News. So for more on this, we are joined by James Dorsey, political analyst from Singapore. James, thank you so much for your time. After the September 11th attacks, the U.S. began not only the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, but a so-called global war on terror. It also controls about 750 bases in at least 80 countries worldwide. With the U.S. wars in place, do you see the world safer than in year 2001?
Well, I think that we're dealing with a whole in many ways with some of the same threats, but also a whole bunch of new threats, whether that's climate change, for example. I think in terms of the legacy of 2001, 9/11 accelerated things, or far less than that it fundamentally changed things. So it accelerated the militarization of U.S. foreign policy, which was already starting, in a sense, with the United States after the fall of the collapse of the Soviet Union, being the sole superpower in the world and acting as such. What I think much of the discussion has not addressed is the fact that far more than the militarization of foreign policy is probably the legacy of Osama bin Laden when it comes to undermining the cohesiveness, or contributing to the undermining of the cohesiveness of societies across the world, whether we're talking about the West with the rise of populism, nationalism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, other forms of racism, whether we're talking about Hindutva in India, or for that matter, the cultural genocide against Uyghurs in China. And that probably is the most fundamental legacy that bin Laden, and what makes him most probably one of the most important figures in the 21st century, even though we're just at the beginning of that century.
Right. Fair enough. Now, why do you think the U.S. has learned from the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon?
I think we're about to find out, if you wish. What you're seeing at the moment is a significant foreign policy debate among what's called the blob, the foreign policy community in Washington, with new institutions arising that, like the Quincy Institute, that advocate a very different approach to foreign policy, one that, in a sense, President Joe Biden seems to be endorsing when you look at what is emerging as the Biden doctrine, if you wish. But that debate has yet to be concluded, and it has to be put to the test. So I think it's too early to draw conclusions what lessons are being learned. But the fact that there is a debate, and that debate is particularly accentuated by the way the Afghan war ended and the U.S. withdrawal, the fact that that debate is taking place is very important.
Yeah, so has the U.S. really defeated al-Qaeda after its longest war in Afghanistan?
I think you've got to define defeat. First of all, let's be clear. Political violence has been a fixture of human history from day one. So you can question the sensibility of the war on terror. And it will be a fixture of human history. So the issue with political violence is not ending it, it's containing it, it's preventing it, which really means that you're talking about looking at what drives people towards political violence and addressing those issues. When it comes to al-Qaeda, al-Qaeda essentially has a different strategy, and that is where you see the difference between al-Qaeda on the one hand and the Islamic State on the other. In many ways, the Islamic State has the strategy that al-Qaeda had in the days of 9/11, and before that, the attack on the USS Cole, the U.S. Navy ship, and the U.S. embassies in Africa, in Kenya and in Tanzania. So, with other words, cross-border targeting the far away from where you are, U.S. targets, or the kind of attacks that we saw in Europe up until 2017. And for which now you have the trials going on in both Paris and Brussels. And on the other hand, al-Qaeda, which has a much more long-term strategy and is much more today about building grassroots, building community, winning trust through good governance, and then moving to a phase where it employs political violence on a grander scale again.
All right, so how do you think America should celebrate this anniversary of the 9/11 attacks after its withdrawal from Afghanistan?
Look, I think that it's obviously correct for the United States to honor the memories of those who were killed, the victims of 9/11. And it's fair to honor the sacrifices that the U.S. military, for good or for bad, it was politicians that took decisions, not the military, but the military paid the price certainly in terms of blood, but also in terms of treasure. And I think that's something one should honor, whether or not one agrees with the strategy. And I think, the debate that I was mentioning earlier that's taking place about U.S. foreign policy is another way of honoring 9/11 and looking at Afghanistan and obviously Iraq. Let me just say one thing which I think is very important. Afghanistan was a war that the United States could not avoid. This was not a war of choice. The problem with the war in Afghanistan was that there was no strategy. There were no clearly defined goals, or the goals kept shifting. And there was no thinking through of what intervention in Afghanistan would mean and what that would really require of the United States. Iraq was a war of choice, and it was the wrong choice by definition. That's not to say that Afghanistan was the right choice. I just think the United States had no choice.
Right, James Dorsey, political analyst from Singapore. Thank you so much for speaking to me on Indus News. Now, on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of US's invasion of Afghanistan, Afghans say the military campaign has brought nothing but destruction and poverty to the country. More in this report.
The global war on terror declared after 9/11 attacks led to the killing of an estimated 66,000 Afghan troops. Meanwhile, the brutal military campaigns forced over 2.7 million people to leave their homes in the past 20 years. Talking about the legacy of the US occupation, many Afghan locals said the US has hardly done anything constructive over the last 20 years.
The US came to our country 20 years ago. I think their original purpose was not to bring peace and stability, but for economic benefits in a very short time. The US has some projects on Asia, especially Central Asia, so they came to Afghanistan. These projects are only for their own benefit instead of the welfare of the Afghan people.
The Brown University's Cost of War project says the US has spent $290 million per day for more than 20 years of their war on terror. US dollars also created the 9/11 millionaires, a tiny class of young ultra-wealthy Afghans who made fortunes working as contractors for the foreign armies. Over time, US government contracts became the fuel for a system of mass corruption that engulfed the country and eventually doomed its fragile democracy. Many Afghans believe that the experience of Afghanistan shows that democracy is only a cover for the US invasion to other countries, while it actually does nothing to prevent it. They say what the US really pursues is its own interests with zero regard for the invaded nation.
Wherever they go, the US will destroy the country and the resources there. They may spend millions of dollars to help Afghanistan, but the resources they got from Afghanistan are worth billions of dollars as well.
The hundreds of billions of dollars that the US spent on Afghan soil can still be seen across Afghanistan, but worse more than for better. Abandoned air bases, half-finished construction projects, and tens of thousands of untraceable guns litter the countryside.
A video analysis shows that the US may have targeted an aid worker rather than an ISIS fighters in its final strike in Afghanistan. The Pentagon had claimed that it disrupted a new ISIS strike planned following a deadly attack near the Kabul airport on the 26th of August. Earlier, it was revealed that the strike killed 10 civilians, including children, as well as Marai Ahmadi, who was driving the car. The US officials say there were explosives in the vehicle because a larger blast took place after the drone strike. However, the New York Times investigation says there was no evidence of a second explosion, with only one dent on a nearby gate. The Times further said US military may have been monitoring Ahmadi, loading canisters of water and picking up a laptop for his boss. Staying with Afghanistan, the country's National Resistance Front says the battle against the Taliban is not over. A group spokesperson said the resistance will continue despite the Taliban's takeover of Panjshir. The United Nations says Afghanistan urgently needs humanitarian aid to prevent economic collapse and major upheaval. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, warned that it will lead to a massive displacement within the country. Grandi further warned of a humanitarian crisis if health services, schools and the economy break down. He said people are struggling to buy basic goods and concerns over medical supplies are growing. Pakistan's national flag carrier says it will resume flights from Islamabad to Kabul on the 13th of September. It will make it the first foreign commercial service in Afghanistan since the Taliban seized power last month.
The port was severely damaged during chaotic evacuations leading to the U.S. withdrawal on August 30th. But the Taliban have been scrambling to get it operating once again with Qatari technical assistance. Pakistan Airlines spokesman Abdullah Hafiz Khan said the company has got all technical clearances for flight operations. He said PIA has received 73 requests from humanitarian relief agencies and journalists, which is very encouraging. It comes as Islamabad's third aircraft carrying relief goods, including food and medicine, reaches Afghanistan's Khost province. Earlier, U.S. envoy Zalmi Khalilzad said over 250 foreign nationals have departed Kabul on Qatari flights in the past 3 days. Taking to Twitter, Khalilzad said the U.S. will continue to engage Qatar's government and the Taliban for safe evacuations. However, Afghan refugee flights to the U.S. were halted after 4 diagnosed cases of measles on Friday.
Pakistan and Spain have reiterated the combined resolve for provision of humanitarian assistance to Afghans. It came as Spain's Foreign Minister Jose Manuel Albaraz Buena called on Chief of Army Staff General Qamar Javed Bajwa in Rawalpindi. The military's media wing said the two sides discussed matters of mutual interest, regional security and defence cooperation. The ISPR said the visiting dignitary appreciated Islamabad's efforts for regional stability and successful Kabul evacuations. The Spanish Foreign Minister also pledged further diplomatic cooperation with Pakistan at all levels. Over to the Middle East now. Israeli fighter jets have launched air raids on the Gaza Strip, violating the May ceasefire with Hamas yet again. In a tweet, Israeli army said it struck targets belonging to Hamas in response to alleged rocket attack from the Strip. Palestinian media quoted locals as saying that jets raided 3 sites, including an agricultural land in East Jerusalem. The occupation forces have shot dead a Palestinian doctor near one of the gates of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Palestinian Red Crescent said the regime troops have also injured more than 170 Palestinians in a clampdown on protests in Nablus city. The Israeli soldiers detained 7 young Palestinian men in the Sair town north of the West Bank. In Myanmar, at least 20 villagers have been killed in the country's deadliest fighting between the government troops and resistance forces since July. The fighting in Magway region's Miantar village started on Thursday, 2 days after the opposition called for a nationwide uprising. According to the international media, the troops used heavy artillery, which resulted in casualties. The troops went to secure the area in Miantar and 5 other nearby villages, but the militias fired warning shots and clashed with the forces. Local media said a military spokesperson confirmed the fighting. It also reported the killing of 3 soldiers in People's Defense Forces attack in Yangon on Thursday. Russia has summoned the U.S. ambassador over alleged election interference ahead of the parliamentary polls later this month. The Russian Foreign Ministry said Moscow has undeniable proof that the US-based tech giants violated Russian laws. In a statement, the ministry said Ambassador John Sullivan held a meeting with Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov. It said interference in Russia's internal affairs is absolutely unacceptable. There was no immediate comment by the US Embassy in Russia or the State Department. Staying with Russia, at least 3 people have been killed after a gas explosion caused a 2-story apartment building to partially collapse in a village. Local officials said an 11-year-old girl was among those killed, with 6 others injured. Investigators have opened a criminal case on the grounds that services provided did not meet safety requirements. Earlier this week, 2 people died after a blast at a 9-story block of flats. More news after the break. Stay tuned to Indus News. Welcome back, and let's take a look at the COVID pandemic situation. Mexico has reported nearly 700 deaths from the virus and more than 14,000 more cases overnight. Globally, the death toll has reached over 4.6 million, infecting over 223 million people so far. More in this report.
The Indian Delta variant has brought about new waves of COVID-19 across the world, worsening the situation with increasing infections and deaths. In the USA, Florida appeals court ruled in favor of governor, effectively reinstating his ban on mask mandates in the state's public schools. The White House says President Joe Biden wants the relevant authorities to have all the needed resources to enforce the employer vaccine mandate. This comes after Biden said he's disappointed with Republicans who pushed back his plan to require most federal employees to get vaccinated. The Centers for Disease Control says unvaccinated people are over 4 times more likely to contract COVID-19 and 11 times more likely to die from it.
In this study, over 600,000 COVID-19 cases from April through mid-July were evaluated and linked to vaccination status. Looking at cases over the past 2 months when the Delta variant was the predominant variant circulating in this country, those who were unvaccinated were about 4.5 times more likely to get COVID-19, over 10 times more likely to be hospitalized, and 11 times more likely to die from the disease.
Greece introduced steps to crack down on fake vaccination certificates after a vaccination center worker provided over 40 people with false papers. Meanwhile, France's former health minister has been charged over her handling of COVID-19.
The virus is coming. It was in China. You saw a young Chinese doctor's death. Everyone there was wearing masks. But in France, in early 2020, especially Madam Health Minister, the PM, and other health authorities told us that masks are useless. We as medical workers with a pandemic that could be transmitted by mouth were told that no, don't wear masks. They're useless. And so as a medical worker with 2 colleagues, we filed a complaint.
Australia's Queensland state said it may order snap lockdown after new cluster of cases as the country logged record cases. Meanwhile, campaigners urged Australia to release detained asylum seekers after a COVID-19 case was confirmed at a facility in Melbourne. In New Zealand, cases are rising again, denting optimism that the country was on course to eradicate the virus once more.
Now, Pakistan has reported 82 more deaths from the virus in the past 24 hours. The health ministry says the death toll has reached 26,662. It said over 3,400 people contracted the virus overnight. So far, the virus has infected more than 1.2 million people in the country, while more than 1 million have recovered. Health officials say over 91,000 cases are still active, of which over 5,300 are critical. The entire Pakistani nation is observing the 73rd death anniversary of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah with due solemnity and reverence today. Father of the nation passed away on the 11th of September 1948, shortly after achieving freedom for the nation. Prayers are being held at Quaid's mausoleum in Karachi. People from different walks of life will lay a floral wreath on his grave. On the occasion, Security Advisor Moeed Yusuf said Pakistan is committed to Quaid's vision of ensuring safety and the well-being of the poor. Speaking to Twitter and talking to it as well, Yusuf said Pakistanis should look at their eastern neighbor to realize the value of an independent homeland. Azerbaijan says it will host Turkey and Pakistan for joint military drills from September 12th to the 20th. The country's defense ministry said the first such drills between the 3 countries will be held in Baku. It said the 3 brothers' 2021 exercises aim to improve cooperation and share experience between the forces. Earlier this year, Turkey and Azerbaijan held joint live fire drills in the capital, Baku. Australia and India have begun their high-level 2+2 ministerial dialogue to strengthen bilateral ties. Australian Foreign Minister Marisa Payne and Defence Minister Peter Dutton are on a visit to India. Payne and Dutton met their Indian counterparts Subrahmanyam Jaishankar and Rajnath Singh to discuss defence and strategic ties. The 2 sides also discussed the situation in the Indo-Pacific. The Australian ministers will also call on Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi later in the day. Both countries are members of the 4-nation alliance that the US has been promoting to counter China's rise in the Indo-Pacific. Now, the world has welcomed the announcement of a new government in Lebanon after a vacuum of over 13 months. UN Chief Antonio Guterres urged the new cabinet to implement tangible reform agenda to address the needs of the Lebanese people. The U.S. State Department spokesperson said new administration under Najib Mikati's leadership offers hope that dire needs of the Lebanese people will be addressed. Ned Price urged a quick approval by the parliament so that new government can get to work to address deteriorating economic situation. He said the U.S. stands ready to support the new government with the hard work ahead. French President Emmanuel Macron also called the appointment a very important step to pull Lebanon out of the deep crisis. Beijing says China and Vietnam should refrain from unilateral actions on the South China Sea that could complicate the situation. China State Councillor Wang Yi made the remarks in a meeting with Vietnamese Deputy Prime Minister Pham Binh Minh during a visit to Vietnam. Wang said both states should cherish the hard-won stability and peace at the sea and must resist the intervention of foreign forces. The two sides also agreed to continue supporting each other in the socialist cause and strengthen bilateral coordination. China has historical sovereignty over most of the waterway, but its neighbors and the US say that claim has no basis in international law. The U.S. has urged Ethiopia and rebellious forces from the Tigray region to start immediate negotiations to address their conflict. In a statement, State Department spokesperson Ned Price said Washington, D.C. is gravely concerned about fighting in parts of Ethiopia. He said reports of attacks on civilians and continued human rights abuses are deeply disturbing. Price called on conflict parties to respect human rights and comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law. This comes days after Tigray forces reportedly killed 120 civilians over 2 days in a village in Amhara region. Thousands of people have been killed and over 2 million people have fled as the fighting spread in July from Tigray into the neighboring regions. At least 2 people have died after a tornado swept through an Italian island of Pantelleria. Authorities said 9 others were injured in the incident, 2 of which are critical. Local media said an off-duty firefighter and an 86-year-old man were among the dead. It reported that the tornadoes ripped down a coastal road, overturned cars, ripped off roofs, and knocked down trees. Emergency workers are planning to transfer the wounded to hospitals in Palermo once weather conditions improve. At least 1 person has died and 10 others are missing after a landslide in central Mexico. The landslide at Cerro del Chicoete buried 4 homes in the municipality of Tlalnepantla near Mexico City. 4 children are among those missing. The National Guard troops and rescue workers are searching for the survivors. Authorities had evacuated about 80 surrounding homes as a precaution and asked people to avoid the area. Authorities believe recent heavy rainfall and an earthquake caused the landslide. In Bolivia, wildfires raging through the country's Chiquitania region have cut off multiple communities and destroyed protected reserves. Officials say the blazes burning since August have affected over 1,200,000 hectares of land. They say more than 12 tons of aid have been moved to help the affected families. Meanwhile, in Peru, a wildlife has spread across the hills of the Urubamba district in Cusco. Authorities say at least 80 hectares of grasslands and shrubs have been affected by the blaze. 1 house has been destroyed, while dozens of cattle have also died. The army and local rescue workers have been mobilized to help fight the fire. In Brazil, indigenous women led a march in the capital Brasilia to oppose attempts to strip back indigenous land rights. The protest comes amid a pending Supreme Court decision on native land claims that could worsen an onslaught of aggressive mining. The country's top court is considering a position adopted by the Brazilian government since 2016. The stance claims that indigenous land can only be recognized if tribes were living there when the Constitution was ratified back in 1988. The ruling will affect 230 pending land claims, many of which offer a bulwark against deforestation in the Amazon. More news from Bolivia. An unlikely friendship between a caiman and local man has gone viral. A tour guide, GIL, has struck up an unlikely bond with the reptile. He even shakes his tail and pats the caiman on its head after feeding. He says that the alligator is around only in the dry season when the river is very low. At 4 meters long, Jill admits that getting up close and personal with the reptile does not still make him nervous. UN Chief Antonio Guterres has urged the United States and China to keep bilateral spats out of the climate fight. His statement comes ahead of the next month's 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference. He urged the 2 biggest economies to make sure that the conference becomes a success. Guterres stressed the fight against climate change is a multilateral process and that all nations should individually commit themselves to it. The COP26 meeting is seen as a critical chance to win more country-by-country commitments on achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Earlier, China's President Xi Jinping, in a phone call with his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden, urged that breakthroughs could still be made on climate change if both sides respect the core concerns. NASA's Mars rover has collected and stashed away numerous mineral samples from the surface of the red planet. According to the U.S. Space Agency, tools attached to the Perseverance drilled rock core from Martian lake bed Jezero crater. The samples collected by the rover were hermetically sealed in a titanium specimen tube inside the rover. The feat was announced by NASA on the 6th of September, marking the first such mineral sample obtained from the surface of another planet. Moreover, NASA plans to collect 43 mineral samples from over the next few months from Jezero floor, a basin which scientists think microbial life may have flourished. Now in China, the 2021 World Robot Conference has kicked off in Beijing, featuring robots in the service sector and other fun droids. More in this report.
The conference invited more than 300 top scientists from China and abroad and displayed more than 500 products from over 110 companies. Among the robots is a dog-shaped robot that can replace humans to complete some tasks in complex and dangerous scenarios.
Its biggest advantage is that it can replace humans to complete some tasks in complex and dangerous scenarios. For example, it can adapt to terrains such as stairs, slopes, gravel roads, and grass. In our daily life, we can replace people to do some equipment safety inspection work in some power plants and substations in a high voltage environment.
Another nursing robot for the country's increasing aging population can take people to the toilet, bathtub, and back to bed. Its owners Liu Dongguang sees China as the biggest market for nursing robots, as it has a large number of elderly people and an aging society.
The wheelchair can automatically take you to the bathroom and then automatically send you to the bathtub to take bath and return you to the bed after the shower. If you want to go to the toilet, you can say a word and it can automatically send you to the toilet.
China had 264 million citizens aged 60 and older in 2020, a number set to increase rapidly just as the working population shrinks. The World Robot Conference will close on 13th of this month.
Love and romance were the dreamy threads that bound together Michael Kors' Spring-Summer 2022 collection at the New York Fashion Week. More about this Fashion Week in this report.
Designer Michael Kors took over New York City's landmark Tavern on the Green, his first live runway show since the pandemic began. Although COVID-19 protocols restricted his guest list, Kors said it gave those in attendance an intimate experience. The brand required all guests to be double vaccinated. However, staff, crews and press were subjected to on-site testing before being admitted into the venue. Interestingly, Kors loved to see people able to experience live fashion made his show thrilling.
To be able to put on a live show to me is thrilling. I love live theater. I love people to be able to experience live fashion. We have a live performance today, but lots and lots of checking boxes and being so unbelievably strict with the protocols.
The season Kors decided to look at romance through a streamlined and urban lens. He created collection helps people to celebrate those moments that many have been craving since pandemic started. Actress Kate Hudson, who also attended the show, was thrilled to see performances after many months.
I'm so excited. And I got to see Michael yesterday, and I'm just like, it's nice, you know, and it's nice and small and intimate, which I think is going to be really lovely. But I haven't done this for a long time, so it feels a little odd and wonderful all at the same time.
In the show, models Gigi Hadid and Kendall Jenner paraded through an outdoor garden, while Broadway star Ariana DeBose performed live. Meanwhile, sparkly and shiny fabrics of designer Christian Cowan were on full display. The New York Fashion Week will end on 12th of September, with many cherishing the moments.
Now for the weather report with Munib Hamid.
Hello, welcome to the weather forecast. Now we're going to start with Abu Dhabi, where the weather is expected to be hot, with temperatures rising to 40, while in Amsterdam, partly cloudy weather is expected, with temperatures steady at 19. Now, if we head to Ankara, there is sunny weather with temperatures at 25. Now, moving down under to Auckland, the temperature is chilly at 16 degrees, with rain in the forecast. Now, if you are traveling to Bangkok, there will be a cloudy weather along with few showers, while temperatures will be around 30. In Beijing, temperatures are at 30, accompanied with a partially veiled sun, while Beirut will also experience partly sunny weather with temperatures at 31. Meanwhile, Berliners will experience temperatures at 22, accompanied with thunderstorm. Now, heading to Cairo, the sun will be out with temperatures at 32, and down under in Canberra, the temperatures are at 22 with sunny weather today. In Islamabad, temperatures are at 29 along with severe thunderstorm, while in Jakarta, the temperatures are steady at 33, also with thunderstorm. And that is all for now. Back to you.
With the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.